listening to the Subrogation Support Network, a podcast from Mathieson, Wickert & Layer, America's subrogation law firm, with dissemination of new developments and changes in subrogation law, as well as emerging trends and best practices. Here's your host, Ashton Kirsch.
Hello, everyone. This is Ashton Kirsch, your host with the Subrogation Support Network podcast, brought to you by Mathieson, Wickert & Layer, subrogation attorneys at law. Today, we are going to have a fun conversation. We're going to talk about something kind of new, unique, something that I really haven't given much thought to until I met with Brad at a conference maybe about a year ago. And we talked a bit about toxic tort claims, asbestos claims. And Brad Drew is joining me today. Great guy. Brad is the Senior Managing Director of PACE Claims. He has over 30 years of experience helping companies and insurers manage asbestos and related bodily injury claims and so forth and other toxic torts. Today, we're going to have an interesting dialogue. We're going to talk about PACE, Brad, what he does, and also talk about a really unknown and uncharted territory for subrogation claims, and that is how to identify, pursue toxic tort claims, specifically asbestos, for work comp carriers. Brad, how are you doing today?
Thanks. Good to be here.
Perfect. Well, Brad, I gave you a brief intro. Why don't you tell us a bit about yourself and about PACE?
Sure. Yeah. My name is Brad Drew. I'm one of the senior managing directors at PACE Claim Services. We are a small company now, but we kind of cut our teeth when I started 30 plus years ago at a consulting firm. I'm an engineer by training, former engineer with a major defense contractor, but had found my way to a consulting firm, and which grew into a larger firm called Navigate Consulting, a big firm that did a lot of disputes. But within that entity, we've always had a small group of folks who were really sit central to U.S. asbestos litigation. We were the folks that were hired back in the mid 80s to centralize the U.S. asbestos that was becoming a problem right after Manville had filed bankruptcy in 1982. And the major defendants at that time and their insurers were looking for a way to manage the cases, resolve them. At that point, they thought it would only take 10 or 12 years to resolve everything. And we were fortunate to get hired at that time to be this central facility, really perform all tasks other than legal around the processing and handling of asbestos claims. So we've managed and handled more than 1 million claims over the years. We've paid out more than $40 billion in settlements just through our small little facility out here in central New Jersey.
So your company PACE, what happens is there's obviously these exposures. You're retained by the carrier, or who's your client?
Yeah, it started out where we were retained by this joint defense group called the Asbestos Claims Facility, which then became the Center for Claims Resolution, and then morphed into individual defendants would hire us, major defendants who were receiving thousands of claims a month. And it was because asbestos claims name on average 40 or 50 defendants. Therefore, there's great cost savings to be had because we can touch that complaint one time, extract the information, hold and host the data in our system, push it out to whatever law firm needs to handle it for which client. And on average, 20 of those 40 defendants are clients of ours. So we're able to spread the cost of doing that administrative work across numerous clients, whereas a single defendant would have to hire one law firm to do that, and then the cost would be much more. So folks realized early on that in asbestos litigation, there was tremendous defense cost savings by having a central resource for non-legal tasks. And then it's morphed into proprietary data that we've been able to acquire and put together, and then analysis that allowed folks that were actually settling the claims, and we actually do that too for some of our clients, to achieve lower settlement values for clients. So it's kind of morphed. Again, we're not lawyers ourselves, but we're involved every other step of the way with a mass tort claim, asbestos claim specifically.
So you're using your engineering, your claims expertise to try to make things more efficient, more effective. So I know for years, you hear a lot of toxic tort claims. It's like, Where's all the money go? Well, the only people that make the money are the lawyers, right? You have 50 lawyers on some of those cases, right? Unless you do consolidate, unless you do work together, combine forces. That's 50 lawyers billing. And these are not usually the average insurance auto defense lawyers, right? These are oftentimes more heavy hitting firms with much higher rates. So you have the potential to have huge defense exposure. So it sounds like PACE, at least historically, has helped bring those things together, create some efficiency. So there's not so much redundant work, and we're using data and metrics to be able to, at least on the liability end, and soon we'll talk subro, on the liability end, to make the handling, the defense of those claims more efficient and effective. Is that about right?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
So now I think of asbestos claims, right? And I think about the floor that I replaced in my basement and not telling anybody about the work that was done. Not true. I knew I could just toss it in bags. I did hire a remediation company, guys, I think. But usually think of this as things of the past, right? Old tile flooring. The crazy thing would be that you hear the stories about the hair dryers where basically the insulation elements were asbestos and it would blow asbestos fibers in your face. And all of those things in the movies, the books. Are the claims a thing of the past? I'm guessing that's not the case because we're here today. But what's the current state in the market?
Yeah, it has shifted. The claims that came in the 80s, 90s, even the early 2000s were the claims that it takes years of exposure, heavy exposure, to develop an asbestos-related disease, especially mesothelioma, the killer cancer attributed to asbestos. But back then it was what they called them the big dusties, where pipe fitters and steam fitters and folks that were installing, wrapping pipes on ships. And so insulation was the big area, but it is, as those defendants have gone bankrupt, which we've probably seen close to 100 bankruptcies in this litigation. In fact, some people have said this is the largest transfer of wealth in American history over the past 40-some years.
From the manufacturers to the lawyers, basically.
Yeah. And it has shifted to seeing more what we call take-home exposures, folks who or other alternative exposures of brake works, people have changed their own brakes. But it's gone away from this traditional worker because, well, one, asbestos was banned here in the early to mid 70s. And so that traditional worker who was just exposed heavily has not been exposed for years and has also died also by now. They're just not alive. And today's claimants are either the children, spouses of those SLOMO workers, or again, folks who've done some home kind of repairs and remodeling.
Okay. And understand, this is just something where I just don't know that much about, which I'm learning, and I appreciate learning that, Brad. But are we talking about, so primarily these are exposures from the past, or past products? There's not new products that are primarily an issue. We're talking about at least asbestos related products that were manufactured prior to all of the regulations coming into place.
Yeah, correct. Yes.
What are the primary products we're talking about now? Are there any kind of big hitters that are still ongoing that people should be aware of?
Well, these exposures still coming from exposure to a lot of gaskets within pipe fitting that had happened years ago, brakes, and brakes are a common one today. Those are driving, so it's still people that were exposed 30 or 40 years ago to these products and are claiming that they either had to change pads within those things and just had caused the asbestos to be inhaled and cause disease this many years later for them.
All right.
We believe the claim should be tailing off because of this issue that the exposure just shouldn't be out there. But, one problem is asbestos it's everywhere. We're all breathing it every day at low intensity levels, but because it's a naturally occurring element in the earth that it's mined right out of the ground. And so it's everywhere around us.
And most houses, right? I mean, especially if they're built. Remind me, if you know offhand, what were houses? I mean, is it like 50s and before? Like, when were the houses where you typically see asbestos insulation? Of course, products and tile and laminate and so forth. But the insulation, I can't even remember the name, but I have some in one of my houses.
Yeah, it's houses built pre-70, pre-60 that are still obviously around today, and most people, as long as you don't touch anything. But those exposures are still hard to generate a claim. If you burst and release some fibers in your house today, odds are you still are not going to develop a mesothelioma, just because the science generally points to you need heavy exposure over many, many years. Obviously, there are cases today of people claiming they have not had that heavy exposure and don't have any other source of the asbestos, and those claims will get paid by people today that seem odd or kind of out of the normal.
Sure. Now, that's asbestos. What other type, if there are there other type of toxic tort claims that PACE works on, or that you guys are investigating or working with insurers, manufacturers with?
Yeah, we are kind of our process and what we're set up to do is mass tort litigation. So our specialty is high volume, multi-defendant issues. Our process really isn't geared toward single incident claims, and we kind of don't compete in that space. But talc claims, cosmetic talc claims today is one of the largest new, if you could call it a new type of asbestos claim that's out there that's seeing. And these you've heard about the ovarian cancer claims from women exposed to talcum powder over their life. So that's a big one. Benzene claims, diesel fumes, and PFAS is becoming a new hot topic in which we've begun to get involved as well.
Absolutely. Now the talc claims, you mentioned in relation to asbestos. I mean, what is put your engineering hat on a little bit, just explain to the audience, what's like the correlation to, are they related in some way? Is there, I guess the question, I know the answer to this, but others might ask, is there asbestos in talcum powder? How does that play out?
It plays out because the same thing, the talc was mined, and where it was mined, it included asbestos in the area and in there. And the talc companies for years have tried to refine their talc to remove asbestos fibers, but it's alleged that, it may not have occurred. That science is still, I think, on the side of the defendants, that there is not mostly asbestos fibers inside the talc, but the plaintiffs are bringing those claims, and juries are hearing that, and there's experts on the plaintiff's side that allege there is, they've done testing and found asbestos inside talc.
Interesting. So now, obviously, appreciate the background. Now on to my favorite subject, the reason that you and the audience are here: recovery and subrogation claims. So it's my understanding that you've started to somehow bring about some new programs to assist carriers with identifying subrogation on these mass tort claims, toxic tort claims. As I've said, nearly every podcast I do, at all the webinars and trainings, misidentification and failure to identify subrogation is the number one biggest miss that insurance carriers have just across the board. We're talking arguably $15 billion of subrogation recoveries are just not pursued every single year. It's huge money. Now, tell me a bit about how we subrogate toxic tort claims, specifically asbestos claims.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up that 15 million, because we saw that we believe that there's 80 to 100 million of comp claims paid a year in our estimates, and that we also believe that 2 to 4 billion of that is respiratory illness related. And while 2 to 4 billion is only 2%, 2 to 3% of the total industry, it's a big number. And we found that there's a correlation between this missed recoveries of those respiratory related illness claims that are comp claims. There's just been no effort to go and seek recovery from claimants that have collected in other sources. And our understanding is oftentimes comp should be secondary recovery, that if a claimant collects for the same injury elsewhere, that the comp carrier has a right to some of their payment as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm pursuing, we see this periodically. I mean, I have some black lung cases and some other ones for minors that we're pursuing, where we have historically handled quite a few toxic tort cases where we're asserting we paid comp benefits. We are then asserting a lien against any recovery. Now, usually the claims are not large enough, given the expense of hiring experts and pursuing, getting the actual background, the forensics, the evidence to be able to pursue is very expensive. So usually we can't justify independent action. But yeah, we are riding the coattails. We are intervening. We are pursuing those cases when they're identified. But given how few we see every year, despite our place in the industry, there is a lot being missed. So now let's say a carrier is listening to, and the manager of all claims, ABC Insurance. Wow, this sounds amazing. What do we do now? Now walk me through the process for what PACE does to try to identify those unidentified matters.
Yeah, so it's actually shockingly simple. I believe that because we have and have touched, as I said, nearly every asbestos claim in the U.S., we are able to, the carrier can say, hey, I've got this set of claims, and I said we focus on this respiratory related. So there's a subset of these ICD-9 or ICD-10 codes that are respiratory illness related, and by looking at that subset of your claims and asking us, hey, do a match for us, tell us if any of these claimants either have filed an asbestos claim in the tort system, or we're also able to determine whether that claimant would qualify for payment in one of the asbestos trusts that you've heard about. You hear about the $40 billion available from the ads on TV. And those, oftentimes sometimes that comp claimant doesn't even know they have themselves have a recovery against that trust. The carrier can step in the shoes of that claimant and go straight to the trust for the payment that the claimant would be due. And so by identifying those both areas, potential recovery, it can lead to, as I said, some recovery on this $2 to $4 billion that the industry is paying out on settlement values.
That's fantastic, right? I mean, that's one of those things. I would imagine that most carriers, work comp carriers and health insurers, probably have a ton of these cases just sitting there. And it's really fascinating to me. So you make it, of course, some of these are going to take effort. You're going to need to hire counsel. You need to move forward with. But plenty of them, as you mentioned, there's already a fund set up. So you identified, you have the fund, you can assert a claim against that fund. That's free money. That's money that's just sitting there that nobody's picking up right on the floor in front of the carrier.
Yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned the health insurers, because they actually have jumped onto this, and some of the health insurers are actually using what I'm talking about and are making these recoveries. It's the comp industry that we've yet to turn over and kind of follow in those footsteps. And I know comp's complicated because it's state by state, and or can be more complicated, but I've got to assume that certain states it's much that you can make it work at some level.
Absolutely. I mean, complicated, sure, right? Every state has a different comp form, right? They have a different statute that guides how a recovery is allocated, when a carrier can pursue directly, when a carrier has to just assert a lien, whether or not claimant needs to be made whole, all of these other factors. So sure, there's definitely complexity to that. But in the vast majority of states, frankly, every state, there is a right to recover on workers' compensation claims against an at-fault party. So, I mean, across the board, sure, but I can imagine that that's probably the reason why work comp, obviously fewer claims to go through and to call, also than health insurers, but also just there's that added complexity. Every policy is not going to be the same, right? Health insurance, obviously there's different types of priorities, but I mean, typically, let's say it's an ERISA policy, you just have a pure right to recover. So you can actually pursue that on more of a static or a nationwide basis when comp's different. But just because it's different, just because it takes a few steps, doesn't mean it's not worth it. And so you're saying it's about as easy. Health insurance, you just have the code. You're saying on the comp end, the comp carrier will also be able to use those codes. Look at the codes, look for a respiratory illness of a certain variation, and then identify those claims. PACE then runs that through their systems. And then you're able to say, hey, these this data set of 1,000 claims, 14 of them have potential and you can recover on. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. And the other piece that we're able to add that I think folks don't realize is the comp carrier is also focused on that one site, whatever, the place that the person was employed, that is the claims being paid. And it might even be thinking, well, that's the side I need to think about whether there was asbestos or not. But that claimant probably might have had other jobs and so forth, but we have a more rich information about the other places that claimant would have worked to help say, here's other reasons this person has an asbestos recovery and to pay attention to it. So there's just additional information that we believe is being missed oftentimes.
And this is great because I have a lot of friends who have subrogation vendors that do an amazing job. And they do secondary reviews of files. And they have to actually jump into the system, download all the data, cull it, use AI, use search terms. On your end, it's almost, you're just looking at some basic numbers and you're looking at very simple information that could just be produced, arguably, I'd assume, without giving you access to the system. They produce it to you. You then are able to run that through your system and it spits out dollars, basically.
Yeah. Yes, that's right. Yeah. Yeah, we're able to quickly give an idea of how much recovery is probably out there for you for a given claimant, and then you can make the decision of, how much you'd have to spend to go gathering. But it's pretty easy to make deals with the plaintiff's bar also on these claims, because in theory, they should be kind of pushing these back. They don't always do that. Claimants will often hire a comp attorney that's different than their tort attorney, and sometimes will try to act like they don't have a comp claim in their tort claim. We just kind of help make that match, that bring the light to it.
Now, all right. So the claim has been identified by the carrier. They run their data set of 1,000 claims and they find, let's say they find 50 claims. At that point in time, those 50 claims, what happened? Then it's just here, your process is identified and the carrier runs with it. Or do you guys have any process with PACE, with the administration, pursuit, retention of counsel, anything like that?
We do both ways. Some just run with it themselves and can run with it themselves. Others said, hey, how can you help? And, we do have the relationships we've got with even other lawyers that are pretty adept at going to work up and get these recoveries can be brought in. And it's kind of a matter of how much of a role do you want us to play. And we don't really carry the way, but it can be their decision. And it doesn't, again, it's the subrogation vendors, I think, a lot that really could benefit by kind of adding it to their, I'll call it their desktop, that when there's a claim, there's easy ways for us to highlight to the claims person whether they need to pay attention to this or not. And then from there, can run down the information they might need.
So you're going to partner with everyone, the TPAs, the subro vendors, the carriers. Really, you just have this level of expertise, this data for a very niche area where everything is money's being spent. That's very cool.
I'll just add that, and it also different, sometimes people have a mindset that, I go to ISO and I, put my claim and look for other claims that this has, but the asbestos claims are unique in that they're not there. We happen to be in a position where we're just the only people with the information. And it, we're kind of fortunate that exists, but it just, we were at the right place at the right time back in 1985. And so it kind of holds today.
Well, it's a specialized area too. I mean, it's not like you can handle, hey, for the last 3 years, I've been handling auto claims, uninsured motorist auto claims. Now, just to have the expectation, now I should be able to identify and pursue a complex asbestos case. Like, that's not going to happen. We deal with that every day when we're going to clients. I'm like, hey, what are you doing for your large fire losses? And their response is, we use Joe Schmo debt collector. Really? You're using the same person that's collecting on an uninsured motorist $5,000 claim for a payment plan of $2 a year that also handled your $5 million factory fire or explosion case? Like, that doesn't make sense. I feel like it's a similar background on this, right? For example, We've handled some black lung cases. We've handled a bit of that. We have some expertise. We're not experts like you guys are, right? In most firms, I'll be honest, man, imagine if we took a survey of the audience and the lawyers out there, I probably would have very few hands that have said they'd ever handled a toxic tort claim, because it's unique if you're in the insurance space. So I think that's special. Now, does that come into mind as you're vetting attorneys and talking to lawyers to work with, kind of the lawyers out there? How do you make sure that they have the requisite background and they're not just out there trying to drum up some business to supplement their uninsured motorist claims? Or do you have a good corral of lawyers that you work with out there?
Yeah, we do. There's 400 law firms across the country that kind of are in our system every day. So we got pretty deep relationships, and those have been nurtured over 30 plus years. And most of it's been fed to us from the defendants who hired and knew these law firms and lawyers. But yeah, there's a large group of folks that we're pretty intimate with in this space.
Has been doing it since the 80s for a long time. You have a name in the space. That is great. So, all right. So action items to clients. Here's the takeaway. The takeaway is, if you're a comp carrier, you're health insured, and you're paying medical claims. If you are not currently, running searches to figure out if you have toxic tort claims, you got to get with Brad. I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer in a way. I mean, is there any risk reward? It's all the reward. And I think it's pretty limited risk, right? I mean, if they're out there, you'll find them. They can decide what to do.
Yeah, most of what we actually do give away, we give away this matching to folks just to check, just to let them determine. And there's only a fee incurred if there's actually relevant information that we're able to provide. So it's kind of a no cost check, but it's pretty simple to do.
That's great. Oh, that's great. I'm glad the audience got to hear about this. I'm sure you're going to get some calls from our dozens or hundreds of listeners. We have a great audience here. People are going to be interested in this, but in closing, is there anything else you wanted to mention about you, PACE, about toxic tort claims in general?
No, no, just other than the growth, it's, they're still there. I was just at a conference this past week, DRI Toxic Tort Conference, where the majority of the discussions, while AI was a big topic, still was asbestos and talc. And the fact that we're still talking about it when people thought it was going to go away in the early 90s and just hasn't, still surprises many of us and is going to continue for another 20 to 25 years.
Well, hey, Brad, we appreciate you. Thank you for joining us today. In signing off, do you want to give everyone your email address or tell everyone a website that they can find you at? Of course, reach out to me if anyone needs it. We'll put it in the signature lines of various podcast forums we're on. But just so the audience knows, let everyone know where to find you.
Sure. Pretty easy to find. Brad Giroux, paceclaims.com. Will pop up on LinkedIn pretty easily if you look. And a lot of people will be at Risk World here in Philadelphia, May 3rd and 4th and 5th. So hope to catch up with folks there.
Absolutely. And I'll see you there. It's my whirlwind travels are not over. So I'll be in Philly after London, wherever else they put on my calendar. But Brad, it'll be good to see you out there. I appreciate you. Audience, thank you all so much. This is Ashton Kirsch, your host, Subrogation Support Network podcast, signing off for today.